I'm here with activist and writer Martin A. Lee, co-founder and director of Project CBD. And we're talking about his latest book, The Essential Guide to CBD, everything you need to know about what it helps, where to buy it, and how to take it. Welcome, Martin.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to talking to you about this book because I think that there are a lot of people like me who are listening that are really interested in the medicinal properties of CBD and the cannabis plant, but have a little trouble navigating it, like sourcing it and dosing it and that kind of thing. So I'm really excited about this resource. And just to start, how did you get involved with the CBD project and what prompted you to write the book?
Well, Project CBD actually was launched a little over 10 years ago. We were involved in actually introducing CBD, both the plants and the information about the compound, to the medical cannabis community in California. This goes back to 2009, 2010. There's kind of a long story there. I don't want to go into all that, but what's interesting is I would never have anticipated 10 years ago that if we fast forward to today, that our group, we would have just published a book with Reader's Digest. Really, that's one of the key things about it, that it's a collaboration with Reader's Digest, and it underscores just the very basis that there is such a collaboration, how much change there's been in the culture around cannabis. There's really been a pro-cannabis cultural shift, and CBD has had a lot to do with it. It didn't start it, but it accentuated it. CBD arrived on the scene in 2009, 2010, when it was actually introduced to medical patients in California, and they had an option to use CBD-rich remedies, CBD-rich plants, that's how we refer to it, that had a significant amount of cannabidiol. It's a very significant compound in the cannabis plant that has hitherto been neglected for various reasons, even within the medical community. We didn't know much about it. It's not intoxicating. It has a remarkable therapeutic attributes, therapeutic potential, and it interacts in a really interesting way with THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, the part of the plant that gets you high, which also is very robust in terms of its medicinal properties. THC is a very important medicine. Interestingly, the U.S. government, the FDA, has long acknowledged that THC is a medicine. Since 1986, it's as a single molecule, you can get it prescribed. And now the same with CBD. It's acknowledged as a medicine by the FDA, but only pure CBD, just that compound, and only for children with very severe epileptic disorders. But it underscores the fact that we're working with Reader's Digest, that how much times have changed and how great there's a great receptivity to cannabis as a medicine in general, and CBD in particular.
Yeah, I was really struck by the fact that this is that Reader's Digest was involved, and to your point, it's really mainstream. So it's helpful. That's so great.
We're not speaking to the echo chamber. We again started out with a very closed community in Northern California. People using cannabis for very severe medical disorders, and it's come quite a long way since then.
Yes, yeah. Well, you mentioned CBD and THC, which are two of the compounds in the cannabis plant that I think THC, many of us are familiar with as the element that gets you high, or as the psychoactive element. And then the CBD portion, where more and more people are coming to know it as the medicinal element, although both are medicinal, and you go into that in the book. But there are also, what was really interesting to me is at least 400 other trace compounds in the cannabis plant that work in combination with each other. And that's where it gets tricky. I mean, tricky, it's also really exciting as we learn more and more about it, that the different combinations may have different effect and on different things. So there's not one way to take it or one combination. So I think in the book, it's called the entourage effect. Can you talk a little bit about those compounds and the entourage effect?
Cannabis, the plant, has been described, I think, appropriately by Dr. Raphael Meshulam, an Israeli scientist who's done a huge amount of work in this area. It's been described by him as a medicinal treasure trove.
Mm.
And I think of the crown jewels of the treasure trove as CBD and THC, both equally so. Think of like yin yang, they really work together phenomenally well. And just CBD and THC alone bring an awful lot to the therapeutic experience. You can really take that far and can do a lot. Even just THC or CBD alone has therapeutic value. But when you consider that scientists have identified literally several hundred compounds in the cannabis plant, including over 100 cannabinoids, this unique class of compounds of which THC and CBD, think of them as the lead actors in the cannabinoid family. But there are other very important cannabinoids that are, most of these are a very minor amount that be in the plant. And it's difficult to know really what that brings, what that adds to the experience. But certainly you could identify not just the cannabinoids, but the compounds known as terpenes, which give the plant its smell. CBD doesn't smell like anything, nor does THC. It doesn't have a smell. Mm-hmm. When dogs go and sniff cannabis because they were trying to intercept smugglers, they were smelling the terpenes in the plant, and certain terpenes that are these unique compounds that are very common in the botanical world. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because when you smell cannabis, when you smell the different strains or varietals, they smell a little different. Mm-hmm. They taste a little different, and they impart slightly different effects. But what really gives it the biggest effect is how much THC and/or CBD is in there. That's going to determine a lot of how intoxicating it is, or psychoactive, as someone might say. Mm-hmm. But what really adds particular flavors and unique attributes to the experience, and what makes it different. Why some people say, "Oh, this one makes me sleepy. This one makes me creative. This one makes me energetic. This one makes me relaxed." That really does have all these different qualities. Yeah. And it's a lot to do with the constellation or the profile of the terpenes in the plant, because I think it's been identified of 120 different terpenes in the whole cannabis universe. But in a given particular plant, maybe 20 to 40 terpenes are also in there. But what we look at is like maybe the top 3, 4, or 5, because this can all be measured in the lab, how much of CBD, how much THC, and how much of the top 10 or 20 terpenes are in there. But it really, you can tell a lot by the top few terpenes of what kind. Is it going to be that energetic thing, or is it going to be more like a pain-killing, soporific effect? But the key thing in the beginning of dealing with medical cannabis, the key question I think that's a patient confronts, a physician confronts, is how to manage the psychoactivity of the plant. Yeah. For some people, that's not an issue. People really enjoy the high. Most people do. But there's also a significant segment of the population that doesn't find that to be comfortable at all. I'm sure we all know folks that just don't want, they tried it in college, or whatever. They just don't like the experience. Mm-hmm. And there's reasons for that. You can go into why and so forth. And, it has to do with genetics and metabolize things. But the how to manage psychoactivity, that's the key question in the beginning. So as to make sure that the experience is comfortable for someone, particularly for those that don't want to get high, and yet that they can also get something valuable out of it therapeutically. And a lot of that has to do with the balance, the ratio between CBD and THC. Because it's not just that CBD is not intoxicating. Mm-hmm. It can actually neutralize or lessen the intoxicating effect of THC. That's one of the ways they interact together. It's interesting that it can lessen the high. CBD can lessen the cannabis high, mm-hmm. but the THC, but it can amplify the pain-killing effect. And there's reasons for that, and the scientists have documented. So, getting into that ratio is really, or opening that initial door of managing psychoactivity, because everybody can get to a point where there's too much THC. You could hit a guardrail. You eat an edible and you overdose because you didn't realize it was only supposed to be an eighth of the bite. Some of these things are ridiculous. So we should be aware of that people can have accidents. Fortunately, it's not fatal. It's not lethal. You can't die with an overdose of cannabis. It's all about managing psychoactivity, and CBD is so crucial in that regard, because it's like the lever that can ease up and make it more or less psychoactive, the experience.
Right. You know, you've brought up a lot of points that I want to get into. And so this dosing thing and managing the levels of psychoactivity, and that has felt like the Wild West to me, you know, a little bit, because, and you mentioned this in the book, and again, you know, when you talk about how to, you know, who to go to, like where you can find it, you really offer some helpful tips on that. But you know, there are people who maybe aren't giving the correct amounts or know the correct amounts and that kind of thing. But that there's that element, but it's also not the same for everyone. It's almost like you have to kind of dial in your own thing with it. Or you have to almost experiment a little bit with assistance. Does that seem correct?
Yeah, you know, I mean, cannabis is a friendly plant overall.
Yeah.
You know, some might find the getting high aspect disagreeable, but okay, so then they don't have to get high from cannabis. That's again the gifts of CBD. It's that you can experience the medical benefits without getting high, or with getting less high, and you might find comfortable. But it's not just that. You know, now we have a situation where, I mean, you alluded to the fact there are different products out there. We might not know how safe, reliable, because it's unregulated. But the fact of the matter, there's a lot of different type of CBD products. You don't have to smoke it. So not only can you get the medical benefits from cannabis without getting high, but you don't even have to smoke it. You know, and I think it's those two factors combined that really were very powerful in terms of stimulating, almost exploding interest in cannabis, because there already are buzz about cannabis as a medical thing in the world. You know, I mean, it's, oh my God, thousands of years it's been used as a plant in that way. But just in terms of the moving out of prohibition, there was already a widespread recognition. Well, I don't know about people getting high or recreational, but it does seem to have medical value. And I think one of the impacts of CBD, once it entered the culture, and it was again through the Northern California medical cannabis community that it first emerged on the grassroots level and spread from there, that it provided an opportunity for people who would not otherwise have thought about reaching for cannabis as a medicine. To do so. And CBD made that very easy for people. So it had a lot to do with really, again, accelerating the whole phenomenon, the shift that was already occurring. And now we see the whole thing is, you know, gone practically global. It's become a huge phenomenon in ways that are, you know, sometimes a little bit, I don't know, you know. But yes, you know, to come back to your point, one of the things I really like about this collaboration with Reader's Digest is they really wanted to make a guide to speak to their universe, their media universe, which is quite large. And it's not a world that necessarily Project CBD is relating to on a daily basis. And we do have a website, and we do interact with people from all over the world. Look at the website. But Reader's Digest is a huge media universe all its own. And it's not one that's necessarily had much experience with cannabis. So this is a good way to you know, introduce cannabis as a medicine. And when Reader's Digest first approached Project CBD to feel us out about maybe doing this project together, one thing I insisted on is that, you know, this is not, it can't be just about CBD. It has to be about the plant, and mainly about CBD and how to navigate this wild west of products and so forth. But it has to be something that respects the whole plant and it doesn't diss THC, because that's not what it's. We don't privilege one cannabinoid over another. It's important, you know. But CBD really is unique, and it really has appeared at a very, very important time, I think, with like, you know, the whole commercialization of it is almost mind blowing. You know, 10 years ago where it started. But a lot of the, you know, the problems with what to buy and how to navigate that world, you know, we do get into very specific suggestions of what to avoid, what to look for, and so forth, without getting into endorsing a specific brand. That's not what we're about at Project CBD. But it can be very confusing to people, and like you say, and a lot of it is the responsibility of our own government. It's just abdicated. The FDA has abdicated its responsibility to regulate it.
Yeah.
CBD is now legal. CBD is such a potent molecule that it changed federal law. And now we have the Farm Bill from 2018, which makes it legal to grow a cannabis plant in the United States with less than 0.3% THC, to grow it, to actually harvest it for its CBD properties. And that's amazing. That wasn't happening a few years ago. So, that means there's a source and a supply. It's just that it hasn't kind of gone all the way yet. And I think in terms of being integrated into society, and I think a lot of it has to do with the sort of the lumbering bureaucracy and more bureaucracy that's not used to parsing out the plant and now to say, well, there's a good part now. They still think there's a bad part, but so we're kind of betwixt and between. And I think that's a lot of the problem that people face, is that a lack of confidence in some ways, that they don't know what they're getting if they're just kind of going in blind and trying to figure things out. But it's possible. And it's not scary, and there's some basic rules of thumb, so to speak, that make it pretty easy to get into.
Yeah, and it's really helpful. And, I think I became interested in, I've always been interested, I'm always interested in plants, and I'm not afraid of cannabis, but when my aunt came down with 4th stage lung cancer back in like 2014, and you could get it here in San Francisco with a card. It wasn't quite, a lot has changed just in those 7 years, and so I felt like I didn't quite get the information I needed. I was getting kind of I could tell it wasn't the right combination or something, although the edibles helped her so immensely just with nausea. So this is, a little bit more THC, which helps with nausea and helps with appetite and that kind of thing. But now, really here in San Francisco, where we've been at it for quite a number of years, if you go into a place that is selling it responsibly, they have a lot of information, and they can really help direct people to, you need it for this. This is the combination we recommend. This is how we're thinking about it. So it really has improved quite a lot. And I just want to say, there's a little bit of an aside. I was very excited about the terpenes, and one of the things that because what you're I think research, while it's happening now, we are a little bit behind. Like, there's a lot that we're going to be discovering, in the next 6 months, in the next 6 years. So we're going to see a rapid, I think, uptake, as it were, in information and ability with the plant. But the terpenes really just excited me, A, because I'm a little bit of a botanical geek, and B, because there's the idea that they also participate in absorption or uptake into the bloodstream and that kind of thing. So, just the idea that plants are so helpful. Yeah.
The phrase that is used by scientists to describe the category of botanical compounds, the cannabinoids, they say they're terpenophilic. They're kind of like cousins to the terpenes. Yeah. And the terpenes interact with what scientists refer to as the endocannabinoid system, which is kind of a key thing for understanding how cannabis works in the brain and the body. Terpenes interact with the system as well. And as you point out, they can facilitate the absorption through the skin. In fact, certain terpenes, you add it to a topical, a cream, a salve, or something like that, you can help the cannabinoids actually go through the skin and deal with the pain or the itch or whatever it might be. There's actually quite a few applications for topicals. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so terpenes can play and do play a real important role in our lives. So, no doubt about it. Well, it gets aromatherapy, in that sense. So it overlaps with aromatherapy.
Yeah, well, I have a topical on right now because I tweaked my back, so it's very helpful. I can speak from experience. And you brought up the endocannabinoid system, and that's what I want to get to talking about. And, just reading about and knowing about it, again, here we are, we're learning much more about our system. And it just feels, when I think of the plant world, I think of an ecosystem, and here how all these different plants work together. And that feels like the endocannabinoid system within us as well. And so, it's just how I'm experiencing it, with all the different ways that the different molecules or compounds within the plant interact within our system. And we have this really complex system that we're learning about, and that needs to be in balance, and it can be enhanced by the cannabis plant, because we actually have our own cannabinoids that we create and have uptake systems. So that's I'm getting out of my depth and being able to talk about it. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about the endocannabinoid system within us.
Amazing subject, really. And to me, it's been quite a revelation as I'm a writer, a journalist, and I was writing about the medical cannabis phenomenon in California, different aspects of it, the legal aspect and so forth. The obvious question presented itself as I was serious about the subject and trying to understand it. Well, is there any science that explains how this works? If people are saying it's therapeutic, there must be some explanation for that. And indeed, there is a vast area of science, a kind of a relatively new area of cannabinoid science. And part of that is, much of it is focused on the central discovery of the endocannabinoid system. And in essence, what that is, it's why THC and CBD have effects. But it's more than that. It's sort of where the mind and the body meet. It's the endocannabinoid system is how we, as hosts, communicate with the bacteria in our gut. It's the mechanism of communication, and I think it's how we mediate epigenetic stress from the outside world. It's through the endocannabinoid system that handles that, or maybe doesn't handle it so well, depending on what we're exposed to. So in so many ways, it's a fulcrum for health. But essentially, CBD and THC work because they mimic and augment the effects of compounds in our own brain and body that we produce, endogenous cannabinoids, we call them, plant cannabinoids and endogenous cannabinoids. Endogenous cannabinoids are all mammals, any animal with a vertebrate has a cannabinoid system. And these endocannabinoid compounds that do similar things to the plant compounds, they're part of this system that scientists refer to as the endocannabinoid system. And what it does essentially is it's the fundamental homeostatic mechanism in the body. But mechanism is I don't like that word. You had a much better word for it. You talked about it as an ecosystem. That's really a much better way to think of it, actually, because it's so interactive with all these other things. The endocannabinoid system regulates all biological processes. It's a sort of a phenomenal concept, but it's what's shown to be the case. According to scientists at the National Institute of Health, the leading scientists there, they said that all human diseases involve a dysfunction of the endocannabinoid system. And by implication, if you can modulate the endocannabinoid system, it could have potential therapeutic benefit for all diseases. That's the position of the National Institute of Health. What they don't go and say is, well, there's this cannabis plant that can modulate this system. But in fact, it's not just the plant and not just CBD and THC that modulates the system. It's how we eat. It's our diet has a huge impact on the endocannabinoid system. It's exercise, sleep, all the basic pillars of health. Think of it as the Tao of health. It's the sort of the balancing act that sort of keeps everything running the right way. But when things go off because of poor lifestyle habits or stress or whatever, as we age, there becomes the system becomes dysfunctional in certain ways, and that can express itself in any number of diseases or conditions. That's sort of the big picture. But it's the one metaphor I use sometimes when I talk about this is if you think of a thermostat, what it controls is blood pressure, a little higher, a little lower, and there's another thermostat for controlling bone density, another one for controlling, regulating mood, another one for regulating how you process, you metabolize glucose, et cetera, et cetera. Think of every physiological process, memory, all these different things, all rolled into one thermostat, and that's the endocannabinoid system. It's the kind of the chief regulatory system in the body. But it's better not to think about it in mechanistic terms. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of times where some researchers can really get in trouble because they start targeting a receptor as an on and off switch, where it's much more subtle than that, the way CBD and THC interact with the cannabinoid receptors in the brain and the body, the endocannabinoid system. And so, it's a fascinating moment because the pharmaceutical model always is to kind of bore down and look at and reduce things, and look at one terpene at a time.
Right.
And again, that you can get fascinating information and very useful information from analyzing and looking at the world that way. But you also miss a lot. And I think when it comes to understanding and appreciating the therapeutic attributes of an adaptogenic herb, which is what cannabis is, you don't get the full picture by approaching it the typical ways. You might say the dominant paradigm way. And it's interesting because I think cannabis is really forcing a kind of a relook at some of these things. It's if it doesn't turn up that way on the gold standard double-blind randomized controlled trial, why is it helping people? If they tested it that way, what did they miss by doing it that way? Mm-hmm. What sometimes they get? It really poses a big challenge, I think, to in the Western side, the pharmaceutical establishment, corporate medicine, and that's all to the good. But it also means that the struggle to affirm the importance of plant medicine is going to have to continue, even with legalization. It's just, in some ways, it's just the beginning of a whole set of, I don't want to speak in militaristic terms of battles, but there's a lot of forces at play, huge amounts of money we're talking about just with CBD alone, and the fact that it is now a legal pharmaceutical. Well, why isn't it accepted as a non-pharmaceutical medicine?
Yeah.
Why is the pharmaceutical model privileged? And I'm not saying that it's not a valuable model. It is. And pharmaceutical CBD can help these terribly afflicted kids. But so CBD-rich oils that are not blessed by the FDA. And it's the disproportionate respect shown to these different kinds of medicines, or different versions of the plant medicine that I find unsettling at this point still.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there with, it's there's a dominant paradigm in the way that we view health here still in kind of a Western view, which has many excellent, helpful, it's very excellent and helpful in many ways, and it's limited in other ways. And so what's exciting, really, I come back to the ecosystem of the endocannabinoid system, which is essentially, we're talking about holistic health, preventative health measures as well, which is where the CBD rich oils and that kind of working with it sort of in a preventative way or in a balancing way, and looking at our system as a whole system. It feels not right. I mean, Chinese medicine has this view, but having the endocannabinoid system within us and thinking about that, we have this system that we can maintain and need to maintain ourselves. And we look at how we're poisoning the planet, and obviously we're poisoning ourselves in a similar way, even if we eat organically and do all the things that we want to do, stress being one of those ways, and that can throw off the endocannabinoid system. But if that really is playing a part in different diseases coming about, or being able to kind of trigger or, tie into genetics and these other things, having something, a plant like cannabis that can begin to assist us as we assist ourselves too in changing lifestyle and those kinds of things to bring into balance the endocannabinoid system and perhaps affect or definitely affect our health. It's absolutely exciting, and in many ways, I think revolutionary, at least to the paradigm that has sort of dominated. And it's like we have to kind of, hopefully we're at a point where we're expanding. It sounds like we are, to kind of hold both views. But there's a little tension at times.
With CBD and with cannabis medicine, and I'm serious about referring to it as an adaptogenic herb. It really is. It belongs in that category of ashwagandha. There's other herbs that are so amazingly versatile and all share certain common characteristics. And definitely cannabis belongs there. But what's amazing, one aspect of the science that is so amazing today is that really it confirms the ancient wisdom, which I find comforting. They're just telling you why that, you know, they're just affirming what the Chinese figured out a long time ago about cannabis as a medicine. They refer to one of the supreme elixirs of immortality that lengthens life, that induces longevity, that has yin and yang qualities, CBD and THC, you know, and that's an adaptogen, and that the medicine comes not just from the resin of the plant, but from the seeds, the oil and the seeds, where you get those omega-3s, you know, in significant amounts. That's a really key part of Chinese medicine. And again, we're just discovering this today about how this all fits together. We ran an article recently on the Project CBD website on how when you, with a proper intake of omega-3 essential oils, generally are depleted in our diet. We get a lot of omega-6, but these omega oils actually feed right into the endocannabinoid system. And when we metabolize omega-3s, it breaks down into components that interact directly with our endocannabinoid system. They become endocannabinoids. Endocannabinoids is a whole family. There's two main ones. You can say their names, 2-AG and anandamide, they're called. But there's actually a dozen more, and some of these we get when we eat fish. You know? And to have it explained again why it's so important that we have a balance of omega-3 and omega-6. That the key thing is balance between them. We're sort of overwhelmed with omega-6 in our diet with corn and so forth. But it's also, you get, it feeds the endocannabinoid system, the omega-6 oils. We just have too much of it in the diet, you know. But it's something you said, it's called arachidonic acid, and it's the building block, literally, of the endocannabinoid compounds in the brain. Come from meat and milk and other things in it, and corn, and, you know, in our diet. So, you know, understand these things and understand it, again, in terms of balance and how it comes back to the importance of integrating cannabis as medicine, CBD as medicine into one's lifestyle. And one of the points that we make really strongly, I think, in the book, The Essential Guide to CBD, is that it's best used as part of a healthy lifestyle. Right. It's not, you know, take CBD as an excuse not to get exercise, to enjoy exercise more, you know. Right. And so actually, there's a whole thing with athletes, of course, that they're really into CBD for recovery and inflammation,
anti-inflammatory.
It's no brainer as well. Actually, thing with the head injuries too. So it's to me, it's one of the things that I find most exciting about it is not just the amazing things we learn about CBD when you give it to a mouse and what it does to this. And maybe one day we'll actually figure out if it helps people that way too, officially, you know, through science. But that it broadens our horizon in terms of understanding health in very profound ways. And it touches on some, you know, some of the key things that are really coming to the fore now, like the microbiome, the bacteria in our gut, and again, the balance there and how key it is. It turns out that if there's an imbalance in the gut bacteria, it is affecting the endocannabinoid system, which is then telling the brain that you're depressed. You know, it's sort of, the endocannabinoid system is sort of the communication mechanism between the gut and the brain. And dysbiosis, we're now learning this is really at the root of many different diseases, neurological illness and so forth and so on. Can be, or increasingly it's understood that the imbalanced microbiome plays a key role. Well, now we're learning that THC as a compound is probiotic. That's it's coming out now in the science recently. They haven't found the same thing for CBD. It has a positive effect on interaction between the microbiome and the endocannabinoid system, but it's not necessarily a probiotic effect like THC, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
it's not. We're going beyond the book a little bit now.
That's okay.
Discussion, but it's a little bit in there, and I should say the book is based largely on the Project CBD website, initially information, but it took that information and really presented it in a way that's very accessible to people.
Yeah.
And also brought in other information that we didn't have on our website. So it made for a good collaboration in that way. But as you can tell, I'm very excited about the science and the doors it opens and how it illuminates our understanding of health and how it can kind of point the way toward just sensibly all the things that your mom told you were good to do. Things like that. It's just nice to have that confirmation in a way.
Yeah. Well, I have the book here, and I thought I would just read off some of. I know this is not comprehensive, but it's quite a list in and of itself. Some of the things that CBD is used for, is helpful for, and that there is ongoing research kind of demonstrating this health, as well as tons of anecdotal evidence. So acne and skin conditions, addictions, anxiety, autism, bone health, cancer, chronic pain, dementia, Alzheimer's, depression, diabetes, digestive and bowel disorders, epilepsy, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, heart disease, liver and kidney disease, migraine and headache disorders, nausea, Parkinson's disease, PTSD, psychosis and schizophrenia, sleep disorders, traumatic brain injuries and stroke, weight issues, women's health, and I'm sure the list goes on. And and the book goes into this and talks about some of the research that's happening and talks a little more about each of these things. But I think one of the places that's kind of come about in popular culture that we've become aware of is to thinking of it as something as a helpful or alternative cure for cancer. So it seems like there's quite a bit of research. As you mentioned, we're behind. I think we're behind in the research here in the US just because of the legalities of it. And so maybe there are some other countries that have more research, although we have our research is doing much better. We're doing much better with that now. Can you talk about what they're finding with cancer, both management and cure?
Well, for a long time, in terms of symptom management, and particularly when one undergoes chemotherapy and the method nausea, it's long been known that cannabis is helpful for that. It's kind of a way that the medical marijuana movement, as it were, sort of took off in California in the early. It was in the context of being useful for nausea from chemotherapy, for treatment for AIDS, or for cancer, for other diseases like this. But what's interesting is that there's a lot of research. It's kind of bifurcated. It's two worlds, and some of it's going on in the United States in a very advanced way. In terms of the scientific world, there's a lot of animal experiments, animal models of cancer. They induce cancers, all kinds of cancers in animals, and expose them to cannabinoids, sometimes THC, sometimes CBD, sometimes combinations thereof. Once in a while, full spectrum oils, where you get the essential oil of the plant, and all those things show significant anti-tumoral and anti-cancer properties in these experiments. So there's a lot of reason to be hopeful about the possibilities for cannabinoids being marshaled for their chemotherapeutic properties. And what's exciting about this, for many reasons, but one that's key, is that cannabinoids don't make you sick and nauseous, is like radiotherapy does or chemotherapy does. It doesn't harm or hurt the healthy cells. It has a way of sort of targeting just the cancer cells to destroy them. And one area that's really interesting right now Well, I should point out that there's a whole underground that exists in the United States and elsewhere that involve in the sale, the production and the sale of very potent cannabis oil extracts, CBD-rich extracts, mixtures of CBD and THC, and sometimes mainly THC. So you can get some of these products in licensed dispensaries in states where medical marijuana is now legal. But there's also a flourishing underground, even in those states, for various reasons, it still persists. So, and we know very much that this is going on. And sometimes you get really remarkable reports of cancer remissions, people claiming that these oils are helping them. And, you know, I don't have any reason necessarily to doubt what someone says, but I'm willing to go and say, oh, cannabis oil cures cancer either. You know, I think there's, I think we have to be sober about these things and realistic. And, you know, for a person confronting cancer in their own life or a loved one, that's a very difficult dilemma that they're often facing. Well, what do they do? Do they go the standard chemotherapy route and, you know, suffer the debilitation, the neuropathies and so forth that often happens, and maybe also will save their life, not always, but, or do they go an alternative route and use these oils? And that's also somewhat risky because, you know, there's a lot that's not known.
Yeah.
And it's so I don't envy anyone in that decision, and we don't make those decisions for people. But what we do say at Project CBD is that one doesn't necessarily have to think in terms of either or. Some really interesting research going on, also with animals, but otherwise with people too, that the standard chemotherapy agents and the radiation therapy is being combined with CBD and or THC, or sometimes these full spectrum oils. And they're finding essentially, typically, that it results in needing less of the chemotherapy agent, which is often very harsh and toxic, to do what it was meant to do. You know, a very key thing, and you don't want to give too much of the to a person because you can kill them. It's so toxic. But a little bit too little, and you don't get the effect you're looking for in terms of the standard anti-cancer regimens. But if you lower the amount necessary for these for chemotherapy to work, well, that's a great gift in and of itself. And that's what's being shown. And also the cannabinoids do bring their own anti-cancer aspect into it as well. So it seems the synergy between the conventional, as we consider the pharmaceutical, you know, the cut and burn approach versus it shouldn't be considered versus. I consider ways to utilize these things together, and maybe that's a path that people want to consider. But there's precious few doctors and physicians that are engaged in this area. But there's some are, and they're doing amazing work with cannabis oils and cannabinoids for cancer. Some of the stories I hear from Dr. Bonnie Goldstein in Los Angeles, Dr. Dustin Surak on the East Coast are just phenomenal, jaw-dropping. And so, you know, the thing, just the last point I want to make, what's one of the kind of remarkable things about CBD and cannabis is that as in terms of its therapeutic properties, it can be very much a sort of a, you know, an augmenting one's lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle. But sometimes it also can be dramatic in terms of the health turnaround it precipitates. We see that sometimes with these children with the terrible seizure disorders where no other drugs are helping, and they're seizing 100 times a week. They go on CBD and it's now once a month. You know, that's miraculous, and that catches people's eye. So there's just a lot of ways to think about it, but it can be quite sort of perplexing to people when they hear that whole list that you just read, and we can double the size of that list for what the science is showing, that either on animals and or sometimes on people, that they know about what CBD can do. It's like, wow, how isn't that snake oil? You know, it just so much, and yet there is a scientific understanding that explains how that actually is possible, and that's exciting.
Yeah. You know, I think another limitation to the dominant paradigm that we're still in with kind of big pharma is that, you know, we're looking, and when our culture, we look for the one answer, the big answer. You know, we look for the pill that's going to solve it. And, you know, when we're talking about an ecosystem or, you know, things working in conjunction with each other, a holistic approach, it's not always just that one thing. So, and it makes a lot of sense as if people stop and think about it, that if we're treating holistically, we're looking at these things in combination with other things, that it can affect these different ailments. I'm going to offer you my one anecdotal story. Well, not one, but this is an anecdotal story that involves my cat, Izzy. She was an older cat. She was diagnosed with, in the end, it was a lot of different things. She was throwing some blood clots. She had pancreatic cancer, leukemia, they said, and wasn't doing well. They wanted to put her on chemo. The vet's a friend of mine, so I let her start. And then I was like, it's really, she's not doing well. It's not great for her. And it was right at about the time that they started, that Canapet had just started on the main market. And this is, cannabis for pets, CBD oil for pets. And I got it for her. At a certain point, my vet said, look, she's got about 6 weeks, so decide what you want to do here. So I got the Canapet. I got her on some homeopathy. I got her on herbal remedies. Friends of mine are really great herbalists, and there's a cancer herbal combination. And it takes about a month really for herbal things to really start to kick in and shift the system. Izzy, I didn't know what to expect. She completely came back from all of that and lived another almost 2 years, a little over 18 months. She would go outside. She caught a mouse, had a great quality of life. So, I was now, and the thing I would say is we did give her some chemo in the beginning, and I stopped it because it's just, I think we overdo that. And I do think that helped arrest the situation, like kind of stop it, kind of shock it. And that gave time for, in my mind, I'm not a doctor, I'm not prescribing, but in my mind, it gave time for the herbs, for the cannabis to work. And so it was a really great experience for us there.
A nice anecdote. As a cat lover, I'd say that.
Oh, great. Well, I have another question, if you don't mind talking a little bit more about, because what you brought up is the effect of the potential effects and the research that's being done on brain issues. So with strokes, there are the neuroprotective qualities, and also treating neurodegenerative diseases like dementia or Alzheimer's. Like, to me, these are those, like cancer, those just almost impossible issues to come back from and to reverse, and to think that the cannabinoids can have an effect, that cannabis can affect this, is really heartening.
In 1998, there was a really interesting study published by 4 scientists also associated with the National Institute of Health, including one Nobel laureate, who was one of the authors. And the title of it was CBD and THC as antioxidants and neuroprotectants. Mm-hmm. This was based on research using CBD and THC as looking at them individually. And just basic hard science. Mm-hmm. It's an animal study. But this became the basis of a patent, actually, that the US government took out. Wow. Cannabinoids as neuroprotective and antioxidants. When we talk about neuroprotection, we're talking about protecting neurons, protecting nerve cells, protecting the brain. And cannabinoids have this property that they can slow neurodegeneration. This is something that historically we've seen in different pharmacopoeias with different cultures talk about it the same way. Going back to Chinese medicine, and the oldest pharmacopoeia, the oldest medical text we have as human civilization, refers to cannabis as something that will make you never go senile. That's how it's referred to, and that's a translation, obviously, from the Chinese. But there's something to that, and when they talk about longevity, obviously you can't cure death. Everyone's going to die, but you can alter the quality of one's life if you can actually slow the inevitable degeneration of the brain. It turns out that the brain is always creating new brain cells. Since the time, actually going back to the womb when the brain is being created, but ever since we're born into adulthood, there's a certain part of the brain, the hippocampus, that's involved in creating new brain cells. Cannabinoids stimulate that process. The endocannabinoid system regulates that process. And that process, or if that declines, that's associated with dementia, with depression. What boosts neurogenesis, and not just CBD and THC, it turns out exercise does. And, again, things that make a whole lot of sense in terms of living healthy. But there's, when we talk about something like an advanced condition of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, I don't know about that, but in terms of what good it would do for a person at that point, it doesn't seem that it would hurt necessarily to start on a CBD regimen. But I think thinking of it more in terms of prevention or early signs and intervening in some way, sensible way, that this becomes part of one's health regimen, in addition to the exercise and the other things that stimulate neurogenesis. It's sort of like that old Bob Dylan song, if you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. You're either creating new brain cells or you're not. And things slow down a lot, as we age in that regard. That's just part of aging. Our endocannabinoid system changes as we age. We become more vulnerable to disease. We carry a lot of stress throughout our whole life, which weakens our endocannabinoid system in the long term. But it's, the other area that I think when you talk about the thing about cannabinoids, again, it's not just sort of prevention. It's sometimes it can intervene with very dramatic illness, like the children with epilepsy, and precipitate a real turnaround. And I think there's some very significant potential for CBD in particular, as part of a whole plant matrix, but dominant CBD, for strokes and traumatic brain injuries. There's a lot of science that explains how that would work and why, but strokes and traumatic brain injury are very complicated injuries because they're usually in two parts. The initial thing, and you lack blood and oxygen going to the blood because there's an occlusion or there's damage. And then later on, there's what's called a reperfusion. There's a rush of blood, oxygen to that area. And that can actually be very destructive. So the challenge for medicine, well, if you're doing something to help the oxygen get to the brain, well, that's not really good during that second phase, So, but cannabinoids have this remarkable way of being able to modulate in either direction for this. And they're showing that with stroke, when they do animal studies on it, that both before and after, if the mouse is given the CBD, it limits this damage from the stroke. It becomes less damage to the brain and things like that. So, and it also seems to widen the avenue after a stroke. There are those certain really crucial times where that's where you have to intervene to help a patient. CBD seems to widen that, though there's magic hours, so it's more like a half a day, those things. There just seems to be no reason why medical science, as we know it, pharmaceutical science, can't take advantage of this in some ways on an emergency basis. I would see that in the future, this would be quite possible.
Oh, that would be great. That's really hopeful. Well, Martin, it has just been a pleasure talking with you and knowing about the book. And I think there's so much more in the book that I think people will find helpful. And, we just touched the surface really of what you can find out here on the book and also on your website, projectcbd.org.
Yes.
And love to have you back. I think we're going to be having a rapid evolution of working with CBD. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll hope to have you back soon.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure talking to you.
And you as well.